Now that you know all about the MySQL database and how it works, we've finally reached the critical point where we can combine the power of PHP and MySQL to create truly dynamic, persistent web applications. We'll go back to the familiar Eclipse development environment from the Level 1 video and get back to writing some PHP code. Let's start with an absolute bare bones but critical piece of functionality: user registration. If your application requires authentication, people are going to need login information to use it. This feature will allow them to create their own account and store their information in the database. We're not going to worry about HTML validation or compliance at this stage. We'll keep it simple enough that any browser could display it. So let's have a look at the file Register Dot Php from the sample files. If we have a quick look in the browser, we can see that it shows a simple form prompting for a username and password. Opening up the source code, we start with plain HTML, then break into PHP script with an if condition, checking for a post variable called email. If this all seems a little fuzzy to you, you may want to review Chapter 10 from the Level 1 video. Moving ahead, if we don't find any information posted, we cut back to HTML and display a form to collect the two inputs. At this stage, the script ends there. So let's see what happens when we actually enter some information. Type in a test email address and password, then press Create Account. If everything goes well, you'll see the SQL statement used to enter the information into the database and a message giving the ID number of the newly inserted record. If you should happen to receive an error message, you'll need to troubleshoot. We'll go through the script bit by bit, and you should be able to track down the problem. So let's take a look at what happens when we receive data. First, we connect to the MySQL database. This function takes three parameters. First, the server, usually localhost, which means the same machine as PHP is running on. Second, your MySQL username. In the default setup, this is root. If you've changed or added a user, use that instead. The third is the MySQL password, which is blank by default. If you've changed this to increase security, use your password instead. Detailed documentation is available at php.net. If we encounter an error opening the connection, we stop the script with the die function and output a detailed error message. Next in the script, we use the MySQL selectDB function to tell MySQL which database we want to use. In this case, Newsboard. As you may recall, MySQL can manage many different databases on the same machine. Now for the slightly complicated bit. We build the SQL statement to send to MySQL. This is an insert statement. As you can see, the insert statement requires that you tell it which table you'd like to add the row to. Secondly, you can specify which columns you are including. We need to include these in this case since we are not adding data for the first column, the ID. The ID will automatically be generated by MySQL for us. Lastly, we include the data itself. Note that it is enclosed in brackets and strings are enclosed in quotation marks. So you can see that we have the table, the columns, and the data that was submitted via the form. Next, we print out the SQL statement for debugging purposes, perform the query, then check to see whether it succeeded. If it did succeed, we use the MySQL insert ID function to find out the automatically generated ID that MySQL gave our row. Meanwhile, if any of these functions failed, we print out detailed error messages for debugging. Finally, and importantly, we call MySQL close to shut down the database connection. If we head back to PHP MyAdmin and click the Browse icon, we can see some of the new data that was inserted by our script. So now you know how to use a PHP script to add data to a MySQL database. Next, we'll look at how to get it back out again.